Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Here at Below the Line, we're continuing our Oscar series of film professionals discussing the nominees in their categories of expertise. We're kicking off the second half of the season with cinematography, and I'm excited to welcome returning guests. First, director of photography and director Patrick Cady, whose credits include Girl Fight, Bosch, and the spin-off Bosch Legacy. Patrick, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Next, David Tuttman, affectionately known as Tut. Tut, you're a New York-based cinematographer and director whose credits include Wu-Tang American Saga, Girls on the Bus, and you're prepping now for the second season of The Night Agent. Glad you could join us.
It's very good to be here and see you guys.
Well, I'm glad to see you both. Now, for listeners, these guys have storied careers, and you can learn more about them at imdb.com. Go to the website, search for Below the Line, and find this episode. From there, you can click on the names of my guests. Let's get into it. The 2023 nominees for cinematography are El Conde, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, and Poor Things. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. One note worth repeating, while recognizing our below-the-line compatriots by name, I occasionally mispronounce some of them. Patrick and Tut, please correct me if you notice I get any wrong. Let's start things off with El Conde, cinematography by Edward Lachman.
I mean, come on. I always can't wait whenever he shoots something to see what he does. And holy cannoli. I mean, I'm in love with this photography, and Ed's wonderful. It's the what's interesting to me is all these movies have moments that are super graphic and kind of sear in your brain, and some of them are in like tiny conference rooms, and then some of them are Pinochet floating over the ocean, and then as cinematographers, I think we probably both do this thing where you start really paying attention to the smaller scenes where it's just people talking or people in a room, the storytelling stuff that we all have to deal with. And I just loved some of the gray on gray sense of things in that weird house, and the not necessarily the home run shots, the ones you really remember, but all the subtlety of how he deals with light on a human face is pretty humbling for me.
It's a pretty darn beautiful movie, I will say.
Yeah.
And adventurous in his approach and doing things. And Ed, too, I don't know him. I've heard such great things about him in New York over the years. But his willingness to take technical adventures is pretty darn special. This movie, I was really intrigued by his desire to transplant a monochrome sensor into a camera that had never been done with before.
Oh, I don't know about this.
Yeah, he took a sensor from an Alexa XT, and he moved it. He had Arri put it into an Arri Mini LF because the XT was too large for what he was hoping to do. So just the size and heaviness, and they got it to him 2 weeks before they started to shoot, and he was thrilled because of the stretch in the mid ranges that the bigger sensor got him. There was truly a real payoff. There's a delicacy in this movie, as well as just the starkness of black and white. The midtones are incredible to me.
It's that like middle IRE section seems all stretched out. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's almost like it's black and white, color in black and in white, but not the transliteration from shooting color. It has a gradation which you wouldn't see otherwise, it feels like.
Especially the sky up in a bunch of those shots where you kind of see the sky grade up, and it doesn't feel like it was imposed. It feels like they got it that way.
Yeah, it's a great adventure. And I mean, the movie's a trip. A couple of these movies are real trips, in all honesty, and this one definitely it takes you there with visually the contrast, the sensitivity. Like there's one crazy, I saw it a while ago, but there's this one wide shot which is kind of they're walking across this very dark kind of cavernous place with just two sconcy lanterns on the side, but the amount of stuff you get out of that, the starkness of the darkness and the darkness of characters, versus this amazing ability to capture the most delicate of lights. That was really neat to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And thinking about us talking about this morning, I went to bed last night thinking about the challenge that we often face to try to make something look like we didn't do anything, and how complicated that can get. The audience might see a single light source, but we know there's all these little skips and fills and things in the deep background and something to catch their eye in the downside. And and with Ed, I just you don't feel where it's coming from, and when you do, it feels random enough that it feels like the world. That's, I think, great cinematographers somehow managed to pull that off.
I also pictured the trickiness of a nuanced movie like this visually, with working in a foreign land. And I don't know how well Ed speaks Spanish, but he was shooting with a Chilean crew, and I've shot with foreign, in other countries with native crews, and it's really fun. But there's a whole other level of energy that comes with it, in the translation, and maybe happy accidents ensue because of that too, which lends to what you're saying in terms of providing things on a less designy quality, I guess.
Right. What I love about that is it somehow always reverts to, for me at least, to hand gestures and sound effects.
Totally.
I need, and then a little.
It's true. It all adds to the magic. Other technical things that really interested me here: Ed decided to use 1930s Baltar vintage lenses. So the bokeh in shots is really incredible. The fall off, everything, he wanted it to emulate Touch of Evil and the Magnificent Ambersons in a way. There was very visually, to me, I was reminded of Touch of Evil a lot when watching this movie.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is the ultra Baltars.
Yeah.
And the vintage Baltars. He took some new ones and aged them as well in order to match it up. And I think it really played well for this movie.
And I also feel like he had to watch some Bergman too, because the faces, especially the young nun who comes into the story, there are moments, and it's because she's dressed as that particular nun too. It might make you think of Bergman, but I was like, oh, there's nothing in that frame that is 100% black or 100% white, and I love everything about it. Yeah.
Really well done.
Yeah.
The other thing which was interesting, now it's called the EL zone system for exposure.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder whether that's the Ed Lockman zone system.
It is.
You're right. But it's a whole way. This is more technical talk, but I'm a big fan of false color, it's called, when monitoring.
You and me both. I'm actually, there's a really interesting article about the CL system where it falls apart on newer sensors because the sensors are wider than the system.
Wow.
So like the new Alexa 35, if you look at their spec sheet, you're supposed to put, oh my God, Skid, we're going to go deep. You're supposed to put mid gray at, I think, 32 or something IRE, and they've expanded it in that section of the sensor. And so you can run out of the zone system. And I feel like I stopped carrying my DigiSpot because I've got a colored one that shows me everything everywhere.
Exactly. I mean, this is a funny aside. It's not about the movie, but I only use a light meter anymore, honestly, in the first couple of weeks of a job, because it's actually a badge to get into close personal proximity with an actor. You're kind of,
it's really smart.
With the meter, you're there for your purposes and for their benefit as well. And it's a great way of getting into a close enough space for quiet conversations early on a job to get to know your actors. That's my biggest use of a meter.
You should tell that to every class you ever guest speak at. I think that's wonderful advice. The other thing I do was I call it the Alton test, where I move a light. If I can get the cast ahead of time, I move a light all the way around their face with them looking in different directions. And that's a great time for them to realize you're going to take care of them, and also to have conversations about whatever. And I'm shocked at how few actors have had it done before.
So the trade. I had a question for you guys on this film. There's a few times where visual effects are actually really important to the story. I think the floating over the city, and there's some wire work towards the end.
Wait,
but it's pretty
that was
subtle.
an effect?
I'm curious about, as the cinematographer, when that is so critical, and yet it's not really a visual effects movie on that level. Like, what sort of relationship you think you had, or what kind of extra control over those moments are important for your craft?
To me, it's all about having those initial conversations, and it gets right to Tut was just saying about using the meter. Is every new collaboration, if it's with someone you haven't worked with before, is about them hoping you're going to respect their craft, and you hoping they're going to respect your own craft. And as soon as you can establish that trust, where you're not going to blow them off when they're like, please try to make the green screen or blue screen or whatever they're using as smooth as possible, or they say it doesn't matter, we're going to end up rotoing everything anyway. But to have those conversations about, okay, well, we're always fighting the same things. Like, can we know what the plate is before we shoot the person that's going to go in front of the plate? Like, it's these very, right? It's these really super simple things that become, because you're constantly on the lookout for what's going to make the audience know it's not real, despite the fact it's someone floating over the clouds, and of course it's not real. But you don't want anything in their brain to say like, well, that wasn't photographed 100% there. And it's these tiny little things, and you're counting on your years of experience and being able to have a gut reaction. It's that book Blink, right?
That you have enough experience that you can trust your gut. Yeah, when you see something new,
you kind of have to. Yeah, and the other part of it to me is particular. It's a technical art form, and one of the things we as cinematographers are responsible for in an effect shot like that is that exchange and conversation with our effects specialists. And part of what we're doing is, most importantly, we're there to provide the consistent look of what the show is, but we're also there to provide technically the pieces of assemblage which work. And the trick of that is each effects house, each effects person will have a different opinion as to what's required. I've had green screen requests where the green screen should be shot a stop below exposure. I've had other people request that to stop and a half above exposure. So as those conversations happen over a career, you start realizing that there's no one rule, which allows it to fall back into your cinematographic world of whimsy to a degree, while being confined with knowing that you have to make that technical side of the effect work, so that people don't think about the process when watching.
well, this film was a bit of a sleeper. I remember adding it to my Netflix list when it came out, but then until it got its sole Oscar nomination, I hadn't really thought about it that much until it came around. But it sounds like Ed Lachman's reputation, and as a cinematographer, he might have been part of the cinematography conversation in ways that I didn't notice. Is that what you guys think leading into this, or does this film come as a surprise to you as well?
Well, to me, it's interesting. I think the ASC awards are a dead match to these nominations, and both of these categories get nominated by cinematographers, and then they get voted on at the ASC only by cinematographers, but then in the Academy by any member of the Academy who has any thought about anything in their head. So I've always find it interesting in years where the ASC award is different than the Oscar, because one is filmmakers and the other is cinematographers only. And so it doesn't surprise me that he got nominated, because I think fellow DPs see what he's doing and they want to see what he's done.
One last technical note for this too, with that, one of the reasons they went with the smaller body was a majority of the movie was shot on a 15-foot Techno crane, which
Oh, that makes a bunch of sense.
doesn't it? And
Yeah.
I keep on talking. I mean, I work TV, and it'll never happen more than likely unless I'm on some next level of Succession or something in terms of budget. But the notion, I think it's I can't imagine a better piece of equipment to do a movie like that with than
I
that
agree.
crane. You know,
Yeah.
the flexibility, the speed of setup, all those things. It really it explained to me a lot about how it was possible to accomplish this movie.
Give our non-cinematographers a sense of what it means to have that kind of flexibility you're talking about.
Well, within 15 seconds, you can get your camera to a position that's 2 inches above the ground or 13 feet above the ground. You can move the camera in and out without laying track. You can put a head on it that allows the camera to rotate, on 3 axes, not just two. So it immediately provides you with a tool that's a little bigger than a hybrid dolly, but gives you a ton of flexibility right off the bat. That's how I would say it.
Yeah. The thing I always think about is, Roger Deakins has been doing a version of this for a very long time, a single camera on a small arm. And when you watch the films he shoots, I remember that moment in No Country where he's sitting on the bed waiting for Sugar to come down the hall, and the camera just goes right over the corner of the bed. I maybe caught it like, the fifth time I watched the movie, but the camera can go, it's not limited by having something under it. So now you can start going over tables and around over corners and things like that, and move in the way. If you're having a conversation with someone across the long table, but you start focusing on what they're saying, you mentally are pushing in, but now you can do it. And if it's just living on it, then it just becomes the way you start working.
We're going to move on to the second film on our list, Killers of the Flower Moon, cinematography by Rodrigo Prieto.
I guess I'll start off with a little of the technical. This was a movie primarily shot 35 millimeter, but also used a Sony Venice with the OCNXT look, which is their high definition, high latitude look. At 4K anamorphic, they shot both those cameras. The Venice was used for low light situations and dusk. Rodrigo Prieto was able to extend dusk by using as sensitive a camera as that, and they used it for a bunch of night work as well. But the workhorse was a film camera, the Aricam ST, and they had an LT as well for handheld and Steadicam. They used the film to great advantage for the richness of terrain, and I have to say it's not a cinematographic issue, but although we capture all of it, the art direction and wardrobe work on this, the costuming on this movie were absolutely outstanding, I thought, and really enrich the quality of the photographic images pretty much at all times. I was really impressed with this movie for that cooperation amongst departments. Aside from anything, the grand vision came through, I think, pretty darn nicely. They used different lookup tables, different LUTs to install their looks, and things changed based upon times in the story, so that they were editorializing with their look through different chapters of our characters' lives. Filmed with beautiful Panavision T-series anamorphics and Petzval lenses. The Petzval lenses were for Martin Scorsese's 1917 Bell and Howell camera that they used for the newsreel footage. So they used an actual antique camera that Marty owns. So pretty darn neat. And that's kind of what I got off of my very quick research.
I'm so glad you did it, because I haven't.
You watched some movies more recently than I, but I did some of the technical stuff.
That's really wonderful. For me, again, it's Rodrigo's ability to it's really interesting. He can switch very seamlessly between there are moments where it's very movie lighting, where the light is coming from I don't know where and I don't care because everyone looks great, or from the tops of things where in that time period it probably wouldn't have been that way, but it totally makes sense to me watching it. And then there are other moments where I feel like that is just beautiful northern light coming through a giant window. And of course, they both could have been created, and a skilled cinematographer can make you believe those things. Um, it's it's got to be so interesting working with Scorsese on shot design too, and the way things are going to cut together. It's always, there's always going to be some moment in a Scorsese film where something moves really quickly or succinctly, and it was just planned that way, that it's just been cut together frame accurate, which I always appreciate, because I think that's, having started as an electrician and gaffer, I always go to the lighting first, but then now directing, I think a lot about designing how shots are going to cut together, and the conversation that needs to be with your cinematographer, so that it all moves as seamlessly as his films always seem to do. That's a collaboration. That's a real fun thing to watch.
It's funny, in ways I have less to say than I did about Conde. It's a more traditional movie in certain ways. I very much I felt as if the telling of the tale was primary.
Yeah, you're in very capable hands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that it allowed Prieto to really play with the notion within photography of increasing contrast, increasing pressure, increasing personal devastation as the movie goes on. So, that's to me where someone like Marty has very definite shot designs, and so does Rodrigo Prieto. No doubt. But within that, I found that tonality to be the major contribution. It was a very it felt, for all that it's a really grand story. And there's been discussion about it's not Osage people telling it. It's an older, brilliant Italian American director, but there's a real just naturalism that I think is really based on Rodrigo Prieto's work. I found the acting wasn't as natural as the look of the film and the design.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The technical and artiste side of it, like I said, with production design and costumes, that to me really furthered the story more than the performances, sadly, for the most part. But that's a whole other thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and I also don't know if I was thinking about the runtime, and I don't know if it would be as effective, because I know this was another big topic of conversation about the movie, but I feel some of what the movie is doing so effectively is showing you how people can be just ground upon for a long time, and that pressure is just as evil as if someone comes up and shoots someone in the head with a gun, which they're doing anyway. So it's like, it's this shocking level of racism, taking what you want, and that is absolutely, it's interesting to see someone who started in gangster movies do this, because you're like, oh yeah, they're gangsters.
Yeah, but it's a gangster movie where the gangsterism, the gangsters themselves aren't the lead impetus. Almost, we're in this world that there's been an incursion into this world.
The government sponsoring their being gangsters.
Yeah, which makes it a truly great American story,
in
a way, and a real American movie.
I'm with you too, that especially with some of the other movies we're going to be talking about, and El Conde, I also felt like, okay, this is a beautifully, perfectly handled movie, and some of these other things are out of their minds. And that's an interesting thing, right? Oftentimes the showier thing will get the most praise. So I am glad it got nominated for cinematography.
Totally. Beautifully natural.
And also nominated for costume design and for production design. And so the idea of the collaboration that cinematography both showcases and, it sounds like, benefits from the work that was done in those areas as well.
Yeah, it's a real beautiful unified front.
Absolutely. Really important. It makes the day go much better. That's for sure.
Well, the third movie on our list is Maestro, cinematography by Matthew Libatique.
Maddie. So one of my favorite shots in this is when they first meet as a couple, and there's a ghost light on a stage, and it gets staged the way every single one of us would want it to get staged, and the light gets used, and I'm sure David will tell us the technical aspect that makes the light do what it does between them. And then they get really close to each other, and they each have a downside shadow side kick in their shadow side eye that I am pretty sure could not come from the light that's in the shot. And this is what makes a fantastic cinematographer, because you buy it, it's beautiful, and it did not come easy. Like the cast has to do the exact right thing. There has to be this collaboration. It helps when your lead actor is the director. And is obviously strongly collaborating with a talented cinematographer. So that I'll be thinking about that shot for a long time. And if I see him at the ASC Awards, that's the thing I'm going to ask him about.
This movie, I don't have a ton of technical stuff about it in a way, although I was fascinated by the show starts with a 1:3:3 classic aspect ratio. And it's all kind of, and the story of young Leonard and the young love story and the love story are told in that aspect ratio. And then suddenly, spoiler alert, Mrs. Bernstein passes away. And all of a sudden, we're in a 1:8:5 aspect ratio where the world is wider and he's more alone in a frame than he had been before. And I thought that was really fascinating storytelling about a man whose passions were in so many different places. Clearly, their relationship was the core, and her acceptance of him. But I found that to be a really beautiful piece of visual storytelling. The black and white of it as a memory, and the color as current and as I get muddled. The thing that really got to me in this movie was the level of motion and frenetic nature of movement, which mimicked the character, was perfectly appropriate, it felt like to me. And the energy that this man clearly had, I remember watching him conduct as a kid.
Oh, cool.
One of the most compelling people I never met, who I had been exposed to as a young person. And in this movie, I thought it was beautifully shot. It's a very crisp, exquisite looking movie. That light in the eyes is exactly an example of that. There's been a lot of criticism of this movie at times and of Bradley Cooper, but I thought he was great, and I thought the makeup, the prosthetic was natural and really well handled. I thought this movie had just fantastic performances overall, and really drew me in as an audience member. I was far less concerned with the technical aspect of this movie when I watched it than I was with just taking in the world and the pace and the performance of it, which is a great sign of good cinematography in a way, because I wasn't really even thinking about it.
And there's lots of technical things happening. I feel like there's also this very overriding, and it's interesting because they must have had prep it thinking in a continual time scale from the course of his life, but they're bouncing back and forth. And the other thing I thought that was really interesting is like the contrast and color palette shifts from when he's being interviewed at the piano and that kind of era. And then when they're first living together, they're married, and the house has this kind of softness in the contrasts and in some of those shots. And it's fun to be lost in the film and then have those fellow filmmaker moments. You're like, well, wait a minute. Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. It's nice to still have a sense of wonder and enjoyment. There are times where I just watch something and take it in. And there are other times where it becomes more, I become more wrapped in it. And this was a movie that did it for me in a lot of ways. I thought it was more successful than the word on the street had it at a point. It's
right. Yeah. Having seen him yourself that's got to add a layer that only a few people, I guess a few thousand people, but it's still like I never got to see him live. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when he debuted his huge composite mass when he first we went to a showing of that, and
Wow.
just the I just so impressive and such an amazing thing to be exposed to as a kid. I have to say, it was
Yeah.
pretty special. So this movie took me back in a lot of ways, and I enjoyed I enjoyed the honesty and kind of the flippant, entertaining manner in which they handled his sexuality. I thought that, I thought as a movie, it had a lot to offer, both visual and ideationally. It worked for me.
And it's about creativity, which,
Yeah.
as fellow creative folks, it's always nice to watch.
So I have a question for you guys to carry over from another episode. So when we did coverage of the sound nominees, we were fortunate enough to have Steve Morrow on the show. He was the production sound mixer on Maestro. And one of the things he brought up was that they recorded all of the instruments live on the day.
Wow.
And so an anecdote he told that I'd like to get your guys' take on was that the way that everything was mic'd meant that the orchestra could not be adjusted to put a camera in a new place or to get a close-up or to, lay down dolly track. To move the mics would have been delays of hours in between. And so consequentially, they had to adapt to that situation. It came up on the early days and obviously played out through the shoot because there's a lot of music scenes in it. I'm curious, as cinematographers, you're approaching a scene like that, what other challenges are there for you, or where does your head go?
I mean, there's this thing that I loved in where in the type of films where I first started, where you'd have these super honest conversations and they couldn't be greedy. They had to be about the whole film, right? Like on Girl Fight, we ended up saving a bunch of money by buying like this old Fuji film stock that was going out of print. Like they stopped making it and it was only in 400-foot loads and it saved us a ton. But we gave half of that savings to the production designer who was dumpster diving for stuff for the film. And it didn't bother me. It made total sense. Like you really had that sense of all being in it together. And I feel even on something as big as that movie, if those conversations are starting early and Bradley's overseeing them, then you've just got to get on board. And there's so many times the thing that restricts us ends up being the thing that everyone starts talking about because, the solution you find is, but I mean, there's got to be moments where it also drove Maddie out of his mind,
Yeah, of course. And I think, it is about finding the truth for everyone so you can succeed in as many of your goals as possible. But when you brought up this question, Skid, I kept thinking about particularly certain key grips over the years I've worked with who would have been filled with fury about this, because there is that dance between certain departments and sound often gets the short end of the stick. So with that, I think it's about, I think, to succeed in this business, better to be solutions oriented, and part of the job is overcoming obstacles. So you figure it out, and
at least that one you knew about before you started.
Right, exactly. I mean, on a TV show, when you have 7 days prep, it's one thing, but this movie was being discussed for a very long time. So within that, I would hope that there was an ability and a friendly process by which to come to the solutions.
Well, it must have worked out. They got both their nominations.
Yeah. Then you swear about it when you're making dinner that night.
Yeah.
Could have just gotten that rack from that horn player to that violinist if I could have moved them.
All right. The fourth film on our list is Oppenheimer, cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema. Am I saying that right? You're even close.
I think it's Hoyte. Yeah.
Hoyte. With what we just discussed, Patrick brought up budgetary sacrifices. The first thing I'll say about Oppenheimer was it was originally scheduled to be shot in 85 days. But when they needed to build Los Alamos and they found out what the bill was going to be for the production designing of it, the schedule went from 85 days to 55 days in order to pay for the building of that huge set.
you've just lost as many days as every indie film has been shot within. It's like unbelievable. It's such a blow.
And within that, I will say I'm such a Christopher Nolan fan, and but I feel as if in this movie, that decision, for all that I understand it, I do feel like it kind of showed here and there. That the speed at which they had to work, and I think they're probably clearly there were sacrifices made because of it, and I think also part of it too is that the shooting with IMAX cameras, with the size and bulk of them, and then reducing your shooting schedule so that you have less time to deal with such a huge, cumbersome object. I mean, certainly they had the right equipment to deal with it, but I feel like I felt as if I could feel the camera, and I could feel the camera size at times in the movie. And I don't, and certainly it had the advantages of giving you these incredible fall-offs in focus, and incredible intimate sense of people's faces in a way that the large format will give you. But there were times it felt like camera movements were clunkier than they might have been. I don't know. There was just something. It felt like it was fighting the movie. I loved it, but it felt like it was fighting itself technically. Sometimes it was weird. And I don't know if anyone else in the world will agree with me. but it was an interesting thing with this movie for me.
What I didn't feel that, but I also thought that what's so intriguing to me about the film is so much of it is shots that we're always fighting against in television. Like there is no television or any cinematographer would willfully go into that room that they spend so much time in. I mean, that room is tiny. Now I'm hoping it was a set and they could blow out a wall, but or every wall. But what I loved is, and this is where I think Coates is very gifted, is the complexity of nuance that makes you feel like, oh, they it happens with Deakins too, where you're like, oh, he just gets lucky all the time with his light, like it just happens to look great. And then you're like, well, that can't be. And it's funny that the shot of Oppenheimer in being interviewed, that is that slightly wider lens than it should be, that became the poster. If you were to be asked to recreate that, you're not going to just put someone by a window. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in those shots, without a lot of things going on in those shots, without you ever feeling like, oh, I'm seeing three shadows and I know where all the lights are and I know the quality of the lights. You're like, I just feel I'm in this room that, when you look out a window, you see different colors, and like the light that's hitting me right now, part of it looks the way it looks because there's snow on the ground here in Albuquerque. And like that kind of thing keeps striking me when I watch this. And the other thing too is I watched clips again. I went through it again last night with my screener thing and turned the sound down because, Nolan's so good and or too loud, depending on everyone's preferences, with the sound design being another strong component of the emotion you're feeling. And so I love watching scenes that work on me with the sound off, and it lets you see the cinematography a little better. And I keep getting impressed by how beautifully rendered these quote unquote very simple shots are. And so even if they are being rushed, I don't feel they're ever rolling without themselves feeling like they're ready to roll.
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
And I heard some clip with Robert Downey Jr. talking about the moment where like he realizes he's not going to get confirmed, and they did like 40 takes of it or something, and he was like, oh, I think I got it, and Christopher Nolan was like, yeah, you might have, but. And Robert Downey Jr. said this thing of like, but he wasn't rushing. It wasn't like he had to move on. And he was like, I think you have better in you. And Robert Downey Jr. in this clip talked about everyone has their threshold of laziness, and Christopher Nolan's is non-existent. It's like he is going to keep working at it.
Yeah, he is without a doubt as devoted to his craft as anyone we could meet. It sounds like, in terms of his own personal discipline, what he asks of himself, even in terms of, I mean, there were a lot of mentions. Cillian Murphy actually mentioned in an interview that Nolan has 2 bathroom breaks a day at the same time.
And they're timed.
Yeah, 11 o'clock and 6 o'clock. And I mean, and that's a very kind of old school, the sacred ground of church of filmmaking, and I get it. At the same time, there's part of me which says, as human beings, and I don't think he made other people live by this discipline, but when you got to go, you got to go. And if you have to, as a focus puller, you want to be in a place where you're physically and mentally ready. You're as an operator, and sometimes that means accounting for your humanness, in the most basic of senses. And I found that really fascinating, that he could put that side of his animal existence aside. It's fascinating to me. So
I mean, I definitely want sets to have his version of no phones.
Yeah,
Like,
everybody in the glass all the time. It drives me crazy.
Makes me nuts.
It's true. Yeah. Let's see, what else do I have here? They had a special probe lens made for micro shooting. They did a lot of, and they broke that lens because they were doing all sorts of subatomic fantasy like stuff, and they were spinning marbles in this chamber, and the probe lens got in too close. In fact, one of the camera people warned, we're getting too close, and they pushed in more, and they smashed the lens to bit with marbles as they were doing this kind of wild atomic imaging. So I mean, they took some pretty interesting chances. It feels like they shot on modified lenses, mostly because some of the lenses needed pieces of metal shaved off the back in order to make sure that they wouldn't hit the spinning mirrors of the Panavision 65. So that, I mean, they had all sorts of things to account for in terms of the demands of the larger format.
It's amazing.
But they did in 55 days. Strauss was filmed with wider lenses, closer up to magnify his own manic persona in a sense, and Oppenheimer was done with longer lenses to project the sense of pressure he was under in a lot of ways, and to close the world off so he was more insular and in his own head more. I wish from what I understand, I mean, they showed him making a lot of drinks and drinking, but he was a major drinker. And I would have been interested in seeing a little bit more of that self-abuse as part of the movie, storytelling wise. But within that, there's almost only so much time in a day.
Yeah.
Or on the schedule. That was the other 30 days. There was more of that probably.
Yeah,
when they cut it up.
The thing that struck me when I saw it in the theater the first time was how it felt like like a series of 4-minute trailers. Like there's this energy to it that's these tiny little bites. And that was the only kind of critique I had, was like at a certain moment, for me to think about it means it's so, like, it popped me out for a second that was happening. And then I was like, oh, but that is kind of the genius too, because if this is done too dryly, you're really going to disconnect, right? Like Nolan is getting you this close to this character so that you stay invested. And think about what he's made all this drama about. A bunch of it is about a procedural government thing that most people don't even think about when they think about Oppenheimer. And I think that's what was so interesting about the movie.
The other thing I think we should touch on, which I'm always fascinated with in Nolan's movies, is his great devotion to practical special effects. His avoidance of digital work, of visual effects, and having everything done in a practical, actually physical manner. I mean, that's classic movie making, and it's one of those funny things where Patrick, I don't know about you, and Skid, I don't know about you, but every once in a while something happens, like a lamp broke in the house the other day, and it was just a bolt in the attachment, and I just kind of took I took a paper clip and folded it up and made something that would just close it up until we got another bolt. And my wife was like, "How'd you think of that?" I said, "That's just movie making." It's just that type of practical thinking. It's very attractive to me. I love those type of solutions and that type of thinking. I admire it a lot.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I initially wanted to get in to go work at ILM back when it was all miniatures and stuff like that. That's how I ended up going to film school and forgetting about working in special effects. But it was that era of special effects that was combining all these, 30s and 40s matte paintings with, the beginning of robotic controls of things. And I was like, oh, yes. I mean, the other side of this computer is my 16 millimeter projector with the John Ford print in it, and the covers off, because when the covers are off, the sound works, and when the covers are on, the sound isn't working. And I don't know exactly what to do to fix it, but I'm looking at a bunch of gears and stuff right now.
Oh my God.
All right, the final film on our list is Poor Things, cinematography by Robbie Ryan.
I'll say right off the bat, this is my favorite movie of all the nominees. I just found it to be such an incredibly trippy ride. Robbie Ryan's work was so clean in this movie, it felt like to me. The wide shots, I only saw the movie once, about 3 weeks ago, but the quality of light and lighting in those wide shots blows me away. Wide shots are really hard to do with real texture and feel, and with these imaginary bending sets. And and rarely do I have to watch again, because I kept on saying, well, where and the lights were mostly out the windows, I'd say, but like, where? And how many? Because there's
what
just
stop do you need to use the lens?
Yeah, what a crisp, vivid image, and so hard to make some. I mean, they were using a 4 millimeter lens on this show. They were using a 16 millimeter lens on the Arri camera, on the 35 Super 35 camera, and celebrating the vignetting on the outside. But they basically, the work on this movie was pretty much wide lens work almost always, even in close-ups. And I thought really just exquisite, and it combined like the old school lenses with LED backdrops, and they were designing for the LED backdrops. They had artists who were experts in still photography of fluid dynamics, of mixing various fluids together and getting the swirls of them. And that's how they made their skies in this movie. I mean, I just thought the primitive animal VFX and the celebration of how primitive they were, it's, to me, just the most fascinating combination of old and new. Just really enjoyed that.
I got to watch the sizzle reel for the visual effects people, and that's really fun, because they talk about photographing miniatures and then combining it with photographing the miniature on the LED volume, having the animals walking on the actors, like the actors are laying there, and the different animals, the pigs and the ducks, and are walking on them, and then they're combining them, and then they're adding the stitches. But it's this which I feel like you can always tell when there's this mix of at what point does it make sense? Does it help us to be practical? And then how do we take over in the post effects? And then how does that all combine to be a unified vision? I kept getting pulled out by the super wide angle circular lens, because I was trying to figure out, I didn't have the sense that I have with the David Lynch movie of when I don't understand something, I still know there's a thread holding it together. And I know I've since read all the different logics of when they would use that lens and what for. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get it. And that can be fully on me. I know they went in with an intention, but it kept popping me out. And then the Petsful would show up with that beautiful swirl on the out of focus edges, and I was just like in heaven. I was like, oh, more of this, please.
Yeah, really something. This was a movie that Robbie Ryan operated himself, which he did an incredible job. They also used some zoom lenses, and they were very intricate changes and zooms that if you, as he said in an article, if they were really subtle and it's all on me, and if I blew it, we had to start all over again. And I was really impressed. I love operating, but as a cinematographer, I love having operators. There's nothing like getting your hands on the wheels though and doing a shot yourself or and messing around. It's the greatest. But I am a big believer in camera operators. Not that I'm saying there was a mistake made here. That's, everybody has their way of working in their personal choices. But I was fascinated by the demands that Robbie Ryan in ways put on himself, aside from anything, because I'm sure he could have said, I really would like to have an operator here.
Oh yeah.
But really, really well done.
But there's that thing where as a DP, the only people I tend to get jealous of are every now and then the camera operators, because they're in the scene with the actors. They're right there with the actors. And now as a director, I don't want to ever yell over a set wall. I want to be in the set with everyone.
Totally.
That's where it's happening. And the operators are always in the set with everyone.
Personally, I think it's the best job on a movie set. I mean, I love cinematography. I'm proud of my work. I love directing, but there's just something about operating, which is so quintessentially filmmaking. I mean, the camera's in your hands for that.
It's very Zen. Like you, and it's interesting. Like I always feel like all operators and ACs are like major league pitchers, and they can have an off day, and then you have to be really careful with how you make those adjustments, because just like a performance, just like an actor, you need them to trust their gut, even if their gut is telling them to do something that's making you insane.
Yeah. And it is. Operating is all about being clutch. It's all about being clutch. And it's having, and it takes me back to the feelings I had in high school playing basketball, just
that makes
that
notion
sense. Of, being right in the middle of it and being responsible for good things happening and as part of the team. It definitely my favorite job on a set.
Yeah. I mean, Poor Things, I just kept chuckling at certain moments because I just loved the world I was seeing and what was happening, and Mark Ruffalo being an
How
idiot.
Fantastic. Yeah. And the whole forensics, surgical side of it. And in a way, this crazy celebration of damage.
Yeah.
It's just spiritually. It was quite a lark. And, I felt it held together. And I like movies that have that sense of adventure. I felt like this was going off on, like El Conde too. They both took you on these incredible journeys that really hadn't been experienced in ways before.
That's exactly right. Like you're like, oh, this is something I hadn't even thought to think about, and now I'm soaking in it, right? Like it's surrounding me,
and I understand it.
Yeah, which is shocking.
So and in that, cinematography is a big part of getting you to a place where it's believable, where that's one of our biggest jobs to me as cinematographers is creating a sense of 3 dimensions in 2, and giving the audience that texture and information they need to subscribe to the premise of your story. They're incredibly important parts of the art, of the art form.
It's unique. It's moving pictures. It's a unique art form, and you're in control of image and time too. I love that aspect of it. That you're also the way the shots get designed and delivered, and the other thing I just adore, which is that paperclip thing you were talking about earlier, is just out of frame can be madness.
Who knows?
It does not matter.
Controlled
I only
chaos.
care about what is 1 millimeter, like just from the frame in. Everything else can be bonkers.
It's true.
which makes Poor Things even tougher because that frame is so huge.
Yeah, where's all the junk go? Yeah, totally, exactly. That's funny.
Well, I'll have you guys break these down. Are there any other 2023 movies you'd recommend on account of the cinematography?
I have to say, I really thought Barbie was a very well shot movie. It was exactly right.
It was perfectly photographed
for that film. I admired the work there a lot. It's so clean. People, as far as aesthetics, and people needed. It's a movie about plastic dolls. The flawless, bright presentation of the actor. I mean, it was really, really, really nice. I also have to say, for all that I found it kind of flawed in certain ways, I really liked how Ferrari was shot. The car races were photographed. It was acknowledging a bygone era in a way. It felt like it was shot back in the day, technically, as opposed to just being propped that way. It felt like the way the kooky zooms in the middle of the racing and stuff, and all these different things, which were so much a product of the 50s, 60s, early 70s filmmaking, are very much incorporated in this movie. And I really liked that flavor.
I'm a sucker for Asteroid City. I mean, I'm a Wes Anderson. I just love falling into his world, and the palette Bob Yeoman shot it as he has many of Mr. Anderson's films, and so I just kind of giggled the whole time because I just like being in those worlds, and they're so there's a completeness to them that you don't have to agree with the vision, but it's perfectly done.
Yeah, nice. I'll definitely be checking that out. I love Wes Anderson's movies too. So
yeah, he plays again with he seems lately to be enjoying these like little offshoots to other part, like, let me tell you about this, and then boom, you're in another type of presentation, sometimes even animation, right, in the French Dispatch. And I had a fun time watching that movie.
Nice.
Patrick, did you watch his shorts on Netflix, the ones based on the Roald Dahl stories?
I started to, and then something, dinner happened or something, so I need to go
I'm
back.
in the same boat. Yeah, they're at the front of my list for sure.
Yeah.
Loving Roald Dahl short stories aside from anything. It's a perfect combination, it seems to me.
Yeah, he's the one to do it. That team is the team to do it.
All right, well, on that note, guys, we're going to call it a wrap. As always, a pleasure having you guys here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, below the line, oneword.biz. That's B-I-Z. This is the back half of our Oscar series. 7 down with 5 more to go. I hope you're enjoying these insights as much as we enjoy sharing them. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis 5 for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.